welcome to the Pig and Whistle Tales from Azeroth. As always, here at the Pig and Whistle Inn in Stormwind, I go through a variety of subjects with regards to World of Warcraft. Grab a bottle or a pint, sit back and enjoy. Today we're going to be going over PvE players versus PvP players. Now, this is going to be very opinionated. Some people might not like what I have to say, but you have to understand that this is very much my opinion and everyone will have their own, and it's just sort of what I visually see when playing the game, what I've seen throughout my many years of playing and stuff like that. But before we get into that juicy stuff, we've obviously got the weekly news for Retail WoW, which is the world bosses for this week are Nurgash, Muckformed, Morgeth and Antros. Hop on over there, get your anima, get your conduits, all that good stuff. The brawl for this week is Gravity Lapse, so this is Eye of the Storm. Every now and again, the gravity will just invert and shoot you up into the air, and then you glide down at a very fast pace. It's quite fun, to be honest, and you can get a lot of kills just mid-air if you're quick to sniping people. And we have Legion Time Walking that has come back to the game. Now, Legion Time Walking obviously has different mythic pluses, such as Darkheart Thicket, Vault of the Wardens, and stuff like that. So there are more mythic plus dungeons in the pool for this week. So definitely utilise that while you can. And obviously Mage Tower has been back for, I think, about a week now. And that is part of Legion. So definitely head on over there, do your Mage Tower and stuff like that as well. So, PvE players versus PvP players. What would you tend to look at in terms of comparing the two? Now, obviously, we're going to take this from a standpoint of they're playing the exact same class, because obviously every class is different. So, you're looking at the offensive cooldowns and how they use them. You're looking at the defensive cooldowns and how you use them. You're looking at the player's skill / understanding of the game. You're looking at sort of talents. You're looking at the rotation of the spells that are being pressed. You're looking at sort of positioning and stuff like that. So, offensive cooldowns for a PvE player is very simple. In my regard, it's very simple for PvP players as well. When something massive happens within a boss fight, or during a massive pull on like a mythic, obviously you're going to pop your offensive cooldowns, and you would use this in a way that gives you the most damage that you can possibly do. For PvP, you're looking at sort of openings within the arena, battleground and stuff like that to make the most of your offensive cooldowns. So you're not going to pull as much damage as, say, someone doing a Mythic Plus with the exact same cooldowns, because obviously in a Mythic Plus you have just NPCs that are very they're very simple in terms of what they're going to do. They have certain mechanics and you can play around them mechanics. Now in PvP you have a lot of different things. You have damage reductions from players, you have versatility from players, you have many different things that can impact your damage and your offensive cooldowns and how much, of a DPS increase it is. But you're looking at a window of opportunity in both of these sort of areas, in both Mythics and in both PvP. So, in terms of that, you're not looking at much difference, and you won't be looking at much difference in terms of all of these different, or not varieties, categories, I should say. You're looking at very much slight differences that matter a whole lot depending on the type of content that you do. Offensively, like I've been doing, or offensive cooldown wise, I've been doing a lot of Mythic Plus lately, and this is because tier set is so prominent within the game right now, and it is needed for quite a lot of my characters in terms of my alt characters, my main characters and stuff like that. So I need to farm as much of that vault as I can and just get lucky, to be honest. So I've been doing quite a lot of mythics. Now, offensive cooldown wise, it's very simple when you need to press your cooldowns. Say a boss has taken 100% increased damage at a certain point within the fight. Well, it's a no-brainer. You pop your offensive cooldowns at that time. Say your rogue partner in a PvP setting has kidney shotted your kill target. A no-brainer. You're going to pop your offensive cooldowns then and try and burst the target, potentially. But in that instance, you could have many different factors. You could say to your rogue, you pop your cooldowns, try and bait something out, and then I'll pop my cooldowns next go and we'll kill him. In PvE, it's very much, this is set in stone when I'm going to pop my cooldowns for the most part. It might differ from week to week, dungeon to dungeon, but ultimately, you will be popping your cooldowns in the same sort of places in every dungeon that you go into, compared to, say, an arena where your cooldowns might not be, as up as often, because either you don't need to press them, because either their team has pressed something already, so you hold on to your cooldowns to use at a later date when they don't have anything to respond to it, or you press them immediately and stuff like that. Yeah, there's no real timing to it, as much as, Mythic Plus. Defensive cooldowns. Now, I do have to say, from what I've witnessed in PvE content, Mythics, PvP players know how to use their defensives. It's shocking. It really is shocking. Now, obviously, this isn't going to apply to every Mythic Plus player or raid or stuff like that, or PvE player as a whole. But it is shocking how often I see in dungeons so many people not press a damn defensive cooldown when massive damage is coming out. A good example of this, in the dungeon The Other Side, you've got the red sort of enrage masked guys. Now, when they do something which is like a roar or whatever it's called, I forget, but it pulsates AoE damage to everyone in the group. And if you're at a high key, this can do a substantial amount of damage. This can really, really hurt. I press my bark skin and my auto frenzy regen at 40%. So they're my defensives. And if he does it again, I have renewal for my next defensive. I constantly know what defensive I will be pressing. I see the other 2 DPS or something not pressing a defensive for that entire thing, dying and then blaming the healer. And you just look at them gobsmacked like, you have buttons to press, so why didn't you press them instead of blaming the healer? Like, it makes absolutely no sense. PvP players understand the use and impact of defensive cooldowns more than PvE players for the most part. And again, this is just what I've seen and my experience. I could be completely wrong. You might have experienced it the opposite way around. But from what I've seen, PvP players have a more understanding of their defensive capabilities for their class. And it goes, and it just shows in Mythic Pluses and stuff like that when, I have a 1 minute defensive cooldown that I can press for a 20% damage reduction. Someone might have a 3 minute defensive cooldown, but they still might not press it because they're waiting for an absurd amount of damage to come out when, it would have saved them from dying now, and then they still would have had it for when that absurd amount of damage comes back. Or comes out. So, it's ridiculous, the amount of, or I should say, the lack of defensive cooldowns that I see from PvE players in Mythic Plus, in any sort of PvE content, in all honesty. It's absolutely ludicrous, and I think that just comes from PvP players have an understanding of what is going to happen and how to survive. They have a better understanding of how to survive in scarier and more volatile situations, I want to say. Mainly because PvP at the moment in Shadowlands is very bursty, it's very unpredictable. So you're constantly having a game plan to save yourself before the damage has even happened and stuff like that. It's just a mentality thing, I think. And a lot of PvE players necessarily just look at a healer and say, you're healing me, if I die, that's on you. When it really isn't. It's a whole sort of group effort, and, you can't blame the healer at all. Although, um, you can blame the healer for some things, specific people for some things. So this one, I'll get into a story about that in a second, by the way. But it does relate to the next point that I wanted to make, which is player skill and understanding. Now, the player's skill and understanding of the game are completely different. So a PvP player's understanding of the game is very much how every single ability in the game interacts against their class. So I will take Death Knights and Priests as a example here. If a priest CCs or fears a Death Knight, the Death Knight can press Lichborn and be immune to the fear. Now, for 10 seconds, he is immune to fear. But this turns the Death Knight, a playable character, into an undead. And he is literally classed as an undead, like his character. So a priest can use Shackle Undead to CC this Death Knight. And that is an understanding of just how the abilities interact with each other and how your class interacts with a different class. Now, your understanding of the game from a PvE perspective isn't as in-depth as knowing what every single class has. Now, obviously, you do need to know quite a lot of the abilities that classes have, such as Master Spell for Devos or something in Spires of Ascension to remove the magic effect from everyone after the intermission or something like that. But the understanding for PvE players comes from the mechanics of boss fights. So, again, going back to Devos, the final boss in Spires of Ascension, I had a decent group, pumping out good damage, tank was very decent, healer was looking alright. Until the final boss. Till that final boss, oh my god, I'm still angry just thinking about it, and this happened over about 8 hours ago. It's still infuriating. So, Spires of Ascension, you obviously have your timer, as it is a Mythic Plus. It was a plus 15, I think. So, we go up to Devos, and we have about 5 minutes left on the clock. And it is just one boss standing between us and completing the key. 5 minutes. Nice and easy, right? So, we have 4 battle reses because I've had to use none of them during the entire dungeon. And healer dies. Okay, no problem. He died to the run-through. And the run-through ability, for those who don't know, is basically Devos casts for 2 seconds in a direction and charges in that direction. It's very simple. You sidestep it and you go on about casting your spells and whatnot. So he dies to that and you think, okay, maybe he might not have just seen it or lack of concentration. It happens. So res him up. He dies to the detonation. So the detonation is you stand in a big dome and it reduces the damage of the detonation by 90% or something. He didn't get in the dome and died. Okay, again, maybe a lack of concentration 2 times is a bit annoying, but, stuff happens. A lot of stuff happens and you just get on with it. Battle res him. We have 2 battle reses left. We have about 3.5 minutes left to kill Devos, and she's at 70% or something. Okay, not too bad. Easily doable. He dies to the run-through again. The ability where you can just sidestep it so simply. But instead I see him backtracking, and when you think of backtracking, you just think brand new player. Or, that's the nice way to put it, I think noob. Especially at this level, doing these sort of mythic pluses and stuff like that. I can understand if you're a new player, and you just sort of backtrack, it's fine. You're not quite comfortable with the movement and stuff like that. Everyone moves a bit differently in the game. Some people might not even care that they backtrack. They might not do like Mythic Plus content and stuff like that. So it doesn't really affect them, which is fine. And I completely understand that. But if you're doing this sort of content, backtracking is a very worrying sign to see, because your mechanics need to be up there with at least a very decent level, in my honest opinion. So I see him just backtracking, and he gets hit by this run through, and I'm like, okay, this healer's now looking dodgy, very dodgy, and I res him up. We got one battle res left. He dies again to the dot. He just rots down through dot damage and doesn't heal himself at all, which I'm still absolutely like confused about. I'm just again, I don't even know what to say. I'm getting mad just thinking about this, but I'm just so confused as to how he's dying and stuff. And the Warlock dies as well. Warlock dies just through rotting damage. He had used his defensive cooldowns, and the healer just didn't heal him at all. So, it's one of them things. I only have one battle res left, so I'm going to res the healer, because we need the healer. Honestly, I would have taken the Warlock at this point. He just didn't heal. He was like having a collapse, absolute mental breakdown in this fight. And ultimately, we wiped on the boss. We didn't time the key. We wiped again a second time because he died to the exact same mechanics that he died to in the previous wipe and the previous 5 deaths that he had. And it was just incredible. Like, I don't really know what to think. The PvE players can be deceiving, because now PvP players can also be deceiving, I will say that. But PvE players, they can have a great Mythic Plus score. So if you don't know what a Mythic Plus score is, the more and more Mythic Pluses that you do, and at the higher level, you get a score increase. And obviously, if you do, say, a plus 10, you get 100 score. If you do a plus 2, you get 20 score. So, you can kind of tell how good or how high keys people have been doing depending on their, Mythic Plus score. And this guy is around the same Mythic Plus score as me, but can't for the life of him understand why he is dying. And I'm going to be perfectly blunt here. He was not at the same level mechanically and mentally as I am in the game. Now, that might seem a bit big-headed or whatever you want to call it, but visually, over the course of this entire dungeon, he had not proven that he was up to that standard. Now, it's one of them things. You might not notice it as a healer. You might not notice it if one of your DPS is slacking, because in a group of 5, in a mythic, you can get carried in terms of damage or in terms of how good your tank is, etc., up to a certain Mythic Plus key. But when it's a healer, everyone feels it, because everyone's slowly rotting down. They're not using as much global cooldowns to deal damage. They're actually using them to heal themselves and keep themselves alive and stuff like that. So player skill and understanding of the game massively comes into it for PvE and PvP. But I think the understanding and the player skill is a lot higher in terms of its peak potential in PvP. Because PvP, you can translate it over to PvE a lot easier than PvE over to PvP. Mainly because the mechanics that you use or that you come up against in PvE, they will never change. They will always be set in stone, and they will never change. And if a PvP player dies to the mechanic, he gets rezzed up, and he will just understand the mechanic now inside and out. All it takes is 1, maybe 2 deaths, and then it's like, oh, okay, so I'm meant to do this instead, and you sort of alter your playstyle around it. if a PvE player goes into PvP content at, say, so if a PvP player goes into PvE content at, say, a plus 15, and the PvE player goes into a PvP player's content at, say, 1500, it's going to be completely different. And I feel like the PvE player will struggle a lot more adapting to how fast paced the game actually is compared to the PvP player going into PvE, because it's just, from my personal experience, it's a lot more chilled doing PvE content. And it's a nice change of pace, to be honest. I love PvP still. PvP is some of the most favorite things that I've ever done, but PvE, I actually like just pressing my buttons and doing the most damage that I possibly can in a, controlled environment where I'm not getting CC'd, I'm not getting bursted, I'm not having to worry about my defensive rotations as much and stuff like that. So player skill does come into it, but honestly, I think if you were to switch people around, put a PvP player in a PvE player's shoes for a week, you switch a PvE player and a PvP player around, PvP player will have a lot easier of a time adapting, in my honest opinion. Now, again, this is from what I've seen, this is what I believe. Everyone's thoughts might differ to it, and by all means, that is your opinion as well. Don't hate me for it, but it's, one of them things. It's one of them things that I notice, and I believe is something that, definitely could. It would be a fun study, in all honesty. I definitely think it would be a fun study. I might need to have a look and see if people are doing that. But, I mean, if you think the complete opposite, definitely let me know. There's multiple ways to let me know, through sort of email, through Twitch, YouTube comments, stuff like that, social medias, etc. But I'd be more than happy to hear your thoughts on it, to be honest. Now, rotation in PvE and PvP is going to be kind of similar. PvE and PvP players know how to get the most out of their damage. Now, they might not necessarily be able to, PvP players. PvE players definitely will be able to, or find it a lot easier to get their best rotation. PvP players can adapt more, I feel. In terms of adapting to every situation, PvP players can definitely adapt. There's a lot of situations when, say, a tank dies in PvE, in a mythic, and you have aggro on all of the mobs. So this is a common thing. Being a druid, I have a lot of AoE, and I have a lot of just built up aggro for when the tank dies. Usually all the mobs aggro to me. I understand the spells that these mobs use. I understand how NPCs work in the game. I understand what I need to do in order to survive. And being a druid, I'm the one with the battle res usually. So I'm having to do this while figuring out how to battle res or combat res our tank. So I'll usually Typhoon, root them. I'll say to anyone that I'm in voice chat with that I'm going to root them, if in case they are within melee range, because the melees will get hit if they are rooted. And then I'll look to combat res the tank. When the tank goes back in and starts hitting them all, then I'll shadow meld to get all of my aggro off, so the tank can pick them up again easier. Again, I think PvP players have a lot easier time adapting because they've seen so many different circumstances. I've seen people who, now these are ranged classes, melee have a tougher time if the tank dies and they have aggro, because they just insta-turn, smack them on the bonds and they're dead. But I've seen ranged people really panic when the tank dies and they've got aggro. They'll just start running around like headless chickens, and it's like, okay, you just go calm down. They're all grouped up. So what we're going to do is just slow them, root them. You're going to kite around the edge and stuff like that. It's no big deal. But what you see sometimes is like a warlock just run straight through them or something and be like, what do I do? Do I run into them to keep them grouped? And there's no real sort of calmness to them. Whereas the PvP player has seen everything. they've been one-shot by so many different abilities in Shadowlands at this point that they don't even flinch when 200 mobs look at them in a dungeon, to be honest. It's one of them things. Yeah, rotation-wise and adapting, I definitely think PvP players can, just adapt better and get more out of their abilities in terms of when to use them. Say they don't have 2 spells that you would use for your best rotation, you would quickly adapt to still get the most damage out of the spells that you haven't used and stuff like that. Positioning wise, again, it very much depends on the bosses that you go against. It very much depends on people that you go against in arenas. I'd say both have a very good understanding of positioning, because you need to know that you need to be somewhere for a mechanic in the next 10 seconds, and you'll already be moving towards that spot, so you can just keep casting and stuff like that while the boss is doing like their little intermissions and stuff like that. PvP wise, you need to know when to line of sight, you need to run away, you need to get aggressive, you need to be in between the healer and the DPS, so you can CC the healer and stuff like that. So positioning, again, it all very much depends on the boss and everything for PvE players, and it depends on where enemies are in PvP for where you're positioned. So there's not a lot difference there, to be honest with you, but again, it all very much depends on how someone wants to play the different types of bosses that they go against the different types of players that you go against in PvP. And by that I mean, if you've got a melee cleave running at you, you're going to want to kite them. Whereas if you've got, say, like a boss that's got a massive dome that you need to be in, and it spawns it like 10 seconds earlier than what the ability is that will kill you, you run to the dome first and then carry on casting, so you don't need to deal with that as the spell is being channeled that will kill you and stuff like that. So PvE players versus PvP players is very tough to sort of judge, but I would say if you put a PvP player in PvE content, they would find it so much easier than if you were to put a PvE player in PvP content. Again, I can be very biased here because I am a PvP player, but in terms of adapting to mythic pluses and like raiding and anything like that that's got NPCs with set abilities and you know what they are going to do, it's a lot easier to adapt than going into players, human beings, that you don't know what they're going to press next. You have maybe some understanding what they might press, but you don't know how to deal with that. And, you see so many different circumstances compared to you will only see a few circumstances in a dungeon at the very max against like bosses and stuff like that. Again, could be very biased. It is my own opinion, but yeah, I think that just PvP players find it so much easier to go into PvE content than vice versa. Just my opinion. Again, if you have any other different opinions, do check out social medias. You can contact me via there. You can tell me your opinion about it, and I would love to hear it. YouTube and Twitch is also a very nice way to get in touch, as streams are happening, videos are going up, etc. So definitely let me know if you'd think the complete opposite and PvE players would find it easier in PvP content, etc. But that is all for this week. Thank you all very much for listening as always, and go with valor, friend. Goodbye all.